It came to my attention this weekend that our government is preparing again to be generous with other people's money. Joe Biden has said that he's getting ready to make an announcement about student loan forgiveness. And while he has suggested that the government will not be forgiving $50,000, as is a popular position among the House Democrats, he has indicated that he's getting ready to forgive on the order of tens of thousands of dollars and will probably do so through executive order. Naturally, as a saver, and one who has paid off all of my student loan debts decades ago, I was incensed. I'm not sure who is the greater target of my ire, the young borrowers who expect the government to nullify their debts, or the government who seeks to buy their votes. I reflected long and hard this weekend on the situation that we find ourselves in, with the government recklessly giving money to favored blocks of voters and special interest groups. This video is going to be a little long, but I have a lot to say. First, I'm going to address why it is unjust for the government to simply give out money whenever it pleases and to whomever it pleases. Then I will discuss how you, as a saver, can protect yourself from participating in the rampant redistribution of wealth. Needless to say, the government doesn't have wealth, and it doesn't create wealth, but it does control the issuance of currency. And it does have the power to tax, and it does have the power to deficit spend. It uses these powers to redistribute wealth from those who create it to those who consume it. At the moment, I'm afraid that we've reached a tipping point where those who are on the receiving end are the largest voting bloc. It has been said that a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the majority discovers that it can vote itself the largesse out of the public treasury. And this was said back in a time when treasuries actually did have wealth that was gold and silver coin. Now we live in an age where the wealth that is usurped via debt issuance and currency debasement is from future generations. I'm going to read now a short portion of a book titled The Life of Colonel David Crockett by Edward Ellis. Crockett was then the Lion of Washington. I was the great admirer of his character, and having several friends who were intimate with him, I found no difficulty in making his acquaintance. I was fascinated with him, and he seemed to take a fancy to me. I was one day in the lobby of the House of Representatives when a bill was taken up appropriating money for the benefit of a widow of a distinguished naval officer. It seemed to be that everyone favored it. The speaker was just about to put the question when Crockett arose. Everybody expected, of course, that he was going to make a speech in support of the bill. He commenced. Mr. Speaker, I have as much respect for the memory of the deceased and as much sympathy for the sufferings of the living, if suffering there be, as any man of this House, but we must not permit our respect for the dead or our sympathy for part of the living to lead us into an act of injustice to the balance of the living. I will not go into the argument to prove that Congress has no power under the Constitution to appropriate this money as an act of charity. Every member upon the floor knows it. We have the right as individuals to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity. But as members of Congress, we have no right so to appropriate a dollar of the public money. Mr. Speaker, I am the poorest man on this floor. I cannot vote for this bill, but I will give 1 week's pay to the object, and if every member of Congress will do the same, it will amount to more than the bill asks. He took his seat. Nobody replied. The bill was put upon its passage, and instead of passing unanimously, as was generally supposed, and as no doubt it would, but for that speech, it received but a few votes and was lost. Like many others, I desired the passage of the bill, and felt outraged at its defeat. I determined that I would persuade my friend Crockett to move for reconsideration the next day. Previous engagements prevented me from seeing Crockett that night. I went early to his room the next morning and found him franking letters, a large pile of which lay upon his table. I broke in upon him rather abruptly by asking him what the devil had possessed him to make that speech and defeat the bill yesterday. Without turning his head or looking up from his work, he replied, "I will answer your question. but thereby hangs a tale, and one of considerable length, to which you will have to listen. I listened, and this is the tale which I heard. Several years ago, I was one evening standing on the steps of the Capitol with some other members of Congress when our attention was attracted by a great light over in Georgetown. It was evidently a large fire. We jumped into the hack and drove over as fast as we could. When we got there, I went to work, and I never worked as hard in my life as I did there for several hours. But in spite of all that could be done, many houses were burned and many families made homeless, and besides, some of them had lost all but the clothes that they had on. The weather was very cold, and when I saw so many women and children suffering, I felt that something ought to be done for them, and everybody else seemed to feel the same way. The next morning, a bill was introduced appropriating $20,000 for their relief. We put aside all other business and rushed it through as soon as it could be done. I said everyone felt as I did. That was not quite so, for though they perhaps sympathized as deeply with the sufferers as I did, there were a few of the members who did not think that we had the right to indulge our sympathy or excite our charity at the expense of anyone but ourselves. They opposed the bill, and upon its passage demanded the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays were recorded, and my name appeared on the journals in favor of the bill. The next summer, when it began to be time to think about the election, I concluded that I would take a scout around among the boys of the district. I had no opposition there, but as the election was some time off, I did not know what might turn up, and I thought it was best to let the boys know that I had not forgot them, and that going to Congress had not made me too proud to go to see them. So I put a couple of shirts and a few twists of tobacco into my saddlebags, and I put out. I had been about a week and had found things going very smoothly when riding one day in a part of my district in which I was more of a stranger than any other, I saw a man in a field plowing and coming toward the road. I gauged my gait so that we should meet as he came to the fence. As he came up, I spoke to the man. He replied politely, but, as I thought, rather coldly, and was about turning his horse for another furrow when I said to him, "Don't be in such a hurry, my friend. I want to have a little talk with you and get better acquainted." He replied, "I am very busy and have but little time to talk, but if it does not take too long, I will listen to what you have to say." I began, "Well, friend, I am one of those fortunate beings called candidates, and yes, I know you. You are Colonel Crockett. I have seen you once before, and voted for you the last time that you were elected. I suppose you are out electioneering now, but you had better not waste your time or mine. I shall not vote for you again." I begged him to tell me what was the matter. "Well, Colonel, it is hardly worthwhile to waste my time or words upon it. I do not see how it can be mended, but you gave a vote last winter, which shows that either you have not capacity to understand the Constitution, or that you are wanting the honesty and firmness to be guided by it. In either case, you are not the man to represent me. But I beg your pardon for expressing it that way. I did not intend to avail myself of the privilege of the constituent to speak plainly to a candidate for the purpose of insulting or wounding you. I intend by it only to say that your understanding of the Constitution is very different from mine, and I will say to you what, but for my rudeness, I should not have said, that I believe you to be honest, but an understanding of the Constitution different from mine I cannot overlook, because the Constitution, to be worth anything, must be held sacred, and rigidly observed in all its provisions. The man who wields the power and misinterprets it is more dangerous the more honest he is. I admit the truth of all you say, but there must be some mistake about it, for I do not remember that I gave any vote last winter upon any constitutional question." "No, Colonel, there's no mistake. Though I live here in the backwoods and seldom go from home, I take the papers from Washington and read very carefully all the proceedings of Congress. My papers say that last winter you voted for a bill to appropriate $20,000 to some sufferers by a fire in Georgetown. Is that true? Certainly it is. And I thought that it was the last vote which anybody in the world would have found fault with. Well, Colonel, where do you find in the Constitution any authority to give away public money in charity? So here it was. For when I began to think about it, I could not remember a thing in the Constitution that authorized it. I found I must take another look, so I said, well, my friend, I may as well own up. You have got me there. But certainly nobody will complain that a great and rich country like ours should give the insignificant sum of $20,000 to relieve women and children, particularly with a full overflowing treasury. And I am sure, if you had been there, that you would have done just as I did. It is not the amount, Colonel, that I must complain of. It is the principle. In the first place, the government ought to have in the treasury no more than enough for its legitimate purposes. But that has nothing to do with this question. The power of collecting and dispersing money at pleasure is the most dangerous power that can be entrusted to man, particularly under the system of collecting revenue by a tariff, which reaches every man in the country, no matter how poor he may be. And the poorer he is, the more he pays in proportion to his means. What is worse, it presses upon him without his knowledge where the weight centers, for there is not a man in the United States who can ever guess how much he pays to the government. So you see that while you are contributing to relieving one, you are drawing it from thousands who are even worse off than he. If you had the right to give anything, the amount was simply a matter of discretion with you, and you had as much right to give $20,000 or $20 million as $20,000. If you have the right to give to one, you have the right to give to all. And as the Constitution neither defines charity nor stipulates the amount, you are at liberty to give to any and everything which you believe or profess to believe is a charity, and to any amount that you think proper. You will very easily perceive what a wide door would open for fraud and corruption and favoritism on the one hand, and for robbing people on the other. No, Colonel, Congress has no right to give to charity. Individual members may give as much of their own money as they please, but they have no right to touch a dollar of the public money for that purpose. There are about 240 members of Congress. If they had shown their sympathy for the sufferers by contributing each 1 week's pay, it would have made over $13,000. There are plenty of wealthy men in Washington who could have given $20,000 without depriving themselves of even a luxury of life. The congressmen choose to keep their own money, which, if it reports to be true, some of them spend not very credibly. And the people about Washington, no doubt, applaud you for relieving from the necessity of doing what was not yours to give. The people have delegated to Congress, by the Constitution, the power to do certain things. To do these, it is authorized to collect and pay monies and nothing else. Everything beyond this usurpation and violation of the Constitution. I have given you, continued Crockett, an imperfect account of what he said. Long before he was through, I was convinced that I had done wrong. He wound up by saying, "So you see, Colonel, you have violated the Constitution in what I consider a vital point. It is precedent fraught with danger to the country. For the Congress once begins to stretch its power beyond the limits of the Constitution, there is no limit to it, and no security for the people. I have no doubt that you acted honestly, but that does not make it any better, except as far as you are personally concerned, and you see that I cannot vote for you. I tell you, I feel streaked. I saw if I should have opposition, and this man should go to talking, he would set others to talking. And in this district, I was gone fawnskin. I could not answer him, and the fact is, I was so fully convinced that he was right, I did not want to. But I must satisfy him, and I said to him, "Well, my friend, you hit the nail upon the head when you said I had not the sense enough to understand the Constitution. I intended to be guided by it, and thought that I had studied it fully. I have heard many speeches in Congress, but what you have said here at your plow has got more hard, sound sense in it than all the fine speeches that I ever heard. If I had ever taken the view of it that you have, I would have put my head into the fire before I would have given that to the vote. And if you forgive me, and I vote for it, and you vote for me again, if ever I vote for another unconstitutional law, I wish I may be shot. The farmer laughingly replied, "Yes, Colonel, you have sworn to that once before, but I will trust you once again upon one condition. You say that you are convinced that your vote was wrong. Your acknowledgement of it will do more good than defeating you for it. If you go around the district, you will tell people about this vote, and that you are satisfied that it was wrong. I will not only vote for you, but I will do what I can to keep down opposition, and perhaps I may exert some little influence in that way." "If I don't," said I wish I may be shot, and to convince you that I am in earnest in what I say, I will come back this way in a week or 10 days, and if you will get a gathering of the people, I will make a speech to them. Get up a barbecue, and I will pay for it. No, Colonel, we are not a rich people in this section, but we have plenty of provisions to contribute for the barbecue, and some to spare for those who have none. The push of crops will be over in a few days, and we can then afford a day for barbecue. This is Thursday. I will see to getting it up on Saturday seek. Come to my house on Friday, and we will go together, and I promise you a very respectable crowd to see and hear you." "Well, I will be here, but one thing more before I say goodbye. I must know your name." "My name is Bunce." "Not Horatio Bunce?" "Yes." "Well, Mr. Bunce, I never saw you before, though you say that you have seen me, but I know you very well. I am glad I have met you, and very proud that I may have you for my friend. You must let me shake your hand before I go." We shook hands, and parted that day in gentlemanly friendship and amity. It was one of the luckiest hits of my life that I met that man. He mingled but little with the public, but was widely known for his remarkable intelligence, incorruptible integrity, and for a heart brimful and running over with kindness and benevolence, which showed themselves not only in words but in acts. He was the oracle of the whole country around him, and his fame extended far beyond the circle of his immediate acquaintance. Though I had never met him before, I had heard much of him, and but for this meeting, it is very likely I should have had opposition, and had been beaten. One thing is very certain. No man could now stand up in that district under such a vote, and the appointed time I was at his house, having told the conversation to every crowd that I had met, and to every man I stayed the night with. In fact, I found that it gave the people an interest and a confidence in me stronger than I had seen ever manifest before. Though I was considerably fatigued when I reached the home of Mr. Bunce, and under ordinary circumstances should have gone early to bed, I kept him until midnight, talking about the principles and affairs of the government, and got more real, true knowledge than I had gotten all of my life before. I have told you Mr. Bunce converted me politically. He came nearer converting me religiously than I had ever been before. He did not make a very good Christian of me, as you know, but he has wrought upon my feelings a reverence for its purifying and elevating power, such as I have never felt before. I have known and seen much of him since, for I respect him. No, that is not the word. I reverence and love him more than any living man, and I go to see him 2 or 3 times a year, and I will you, sir, if every one of you professes to be a Christian, lived and acted and enjoyed as he does, the religion of Christ would take the world by storm. But to return to my story, the next morning we went to the barbecue, and to my surprise, found about 1,000 men there. I met a good many whom I had not known before, and they and my friend introduced me around until I had gotten pretty well acquainted. At least they all knew me. In due time, notice was given that I would speak to them. They gathered up around the stand, that had been erected, I opened my speech by saying, "Fellow citizens, I present myself before you today, feeling like a new man. My eyes have been opened to truths which ignorance or prejudice or both had heretofore hidden from my view. I feel that I can today offer you the ability to render you more valuable service than I ever have been able to render before. I am here today more for the purpose of acknowledging my error than to seek your votes. That I should make this acknowledgement is due to myself as well as to you. Whether you will vote for me is a matter for your consideration only." I went on to tell them the fire and my vote for the appropriation as I have told it to you, and then told them why I was satisfied that it was wrong. I closed by saying, "And now, fellow citizens, it remains only for me to tell you that most of the speech that you have listened to is with so much interest was simply a repetition of the arguments by which your neighbor, Mr. Bunce, convinced me of my error. It is the best speech I ever made in my life, but my friend Horatio Bunce is entitled to all the credit of it. And now I hope that he is satisfied with his convert, and that he will get up here and tell you so." He came upon the stand and said, "Fellow citizens, it affords me great pleasure to comply with the request of Colonel Crockett. I have always considered him a thoroughly honest man, and I am satisfied that he will faithfully perform all that he has promised you today." He went down, and there went up from the crowd a shout for Davy Crockett, as name never called on forth before. I am not much given to tears, but I was taken with a choking, and then felt some big drops rolling down my cheeks. And I tell you now that the remembrance of those few words spoken by such a man, and the honest, hearty shout that they produced, is worth more than all the honors I've received and all the reputation I have ever made, or ever shall make, as a member of Congress. Now, sir," concluded Crockett, "you know why I made that speech yesterday. I have had several thousand copies of it printed, and was directing them to my constituents when you came in. There is one thing now to which I will call your attention. You remember that I proposed to give a week's pay. There are in that House many very wealthy men who think nothing of spending a week's pay, or a dozen of them, for a dinner or a wine party, and then have something to accomplish by it. Some of these same men made beautiful speeches upon the debt of gratitude which the country owed the deceased, a debt which could not be paid by money, and the insignificance and worthlessness of money, particularly so insignificant a sum as $10,000, when weighed upon the honor of the nation. Yet none of those congressmen responded to my proposition. Money with them is nothing but trash when it is to come out of the people, but it is one great thing for which most of them are striving, and many of them sacrifice honor, integrity, and justice to obtain it. I don't think I could be any more articulate than that in expressing the injustice of being perpetrated by our government, and so I'm not going to try. But I'm going to move forward now and discuss what you, as a saver, can do to protect your wealth from this insidious process of wealth redistribution.